So I had some ideas for the month of October to do a series about the genre of horror. I've written a lot of stuff about horror movies and other horror media for university, and I wanted to adapt it into some videos. So I'll try my best to make the content more entertaining, but still informative. This first video in the series is going to be an intro to the concept of the abject, which is a very important concept when looking at horror. From this grounding in the abject, I'm going to move on and talk about the monstrous-feminine. Both of these concepts I'm taking from the book Powers of Horror by Julia Kristeva, as well as their development by Barbara Creed in her book on the monstrous-feminine. If you'd like to read either of these, I'd recommend the Creed one because Kristeva, being a philosopher, talks in circles, and the added difficulty of being translated from French makes her writing quite confusing, but still interesting if you can be bothered. So I'm going to start by defining the concept of the abject. What is it? Kristeva describes the abject as that which disturbs identity, system, order, what does not respect borders, positions, or rules, the in-between, the ambiguous, the composite. It draws me toward the place where meaning collapses. It is what fills the spaces in between the defined. It is what lies outside of order. Because to create order, you have to push some things outside. To define order, you also end up defining disorder. The outside is a threat to the inside, disorder a threat to order. The abject is both the act of rejecting and that which is rejected, as the act of ordering necessarily involves rejecting what does not fit. So now we're going to talk about what I mean by borders, so we can then talk about what it means to ignore them. So borders and boundaries lay the groundwork for social interaction. They shape the process and character of connection. Anthropologist Frederick Barth describes connections between boundaries as such. Human activities perversely create such leakages through conceptual boundaries by reconnecting what has been separated. They arise, above all, from two sources: inventive behavioural responses to the imposition of boundaries and the effects of social positioning. In this video, we're going to talk mainly about the first one, but we'll come back to social positioning in another one. So, the abject is a response to the imposition of boundaries. Horror is supposed to reside in threats to boundaries because it reminds us of how fragile they are, how liable they are to collapsing. Horror is the perfect home for the abject. Cultural critic Barbara Creed discusses the idea of ritual, through which the demarcation lines between the human and the non-human are drawn up anew and presumably made all the stronger for that process. Ritual is a way in which humans reassess their borders and boundaries by directly confronting what doesn't fit, the abject. Creed describes the horror film as the continuation of a legacy of traditional ideas of the abject, with common horror motifs corresponding to established religious categories of abominations, sins, and taboos. She argues that the horror film functions as ritual, a form of modern defilement rite, which aims to reassert the symbolic order by confronting it with the abject. Even Kristeva says that in literature, categories are able to be broken down and played with, making it one of Barth's inventive behavioural responses to borders. The concept of the abject provides a particularly useful framework for understanding what it is about horror that makes it so horrifying. Kristeva says the abject enacts the law for my frightened body, constitutes and brings about an effect and not yet a sign. This bodily quality of the abject that affects you before you have time to think about it is like how horror is described as a body genre that generates physical responses and erases the border between fiction and reality, immersion and awareness, me and not me. Now we're going to talk about the monstrous-feminine, but to do this we have to start with psychoanalysis, because that's the tradition from which this concept comes from. Now, psychoanalysis is well known to be full of shit, but it can still be a fun framework to analyse things with, mostly because it's so crazy. So, Kristeva's psychoanalytical background distinguishes between the maternal semiotic authority and the paternal symbolic law. So, signs and symbols is a mildly complicated concept you learn in philosophy, linguistics, and anthropology and stuff. But here's a slide with a brief explanation that you can pause if you care. So the abject is associated with the pre-Oedipal complex maternal stage before the imposition of what Lacan calls the law of the father. Yeah, I know it's a lot. Basically, when you're born, all you care about is your mum. And the Oedipus complex is when you realise your mum has a life outside of being your mum, and that pisses you off. So you get mad at your dad because he represents your mum being something other than your mum, i.e. a wife. The law of the father is when you get over your mum and learn sexism or something, I don't know, it's a load of shit, to be honest. But all that matters is that women are associated with the abject. They are scary because of their position as castrated males, drawing attention to the vulnerability of the penis, just how the abject draws attention to the vulnerability of borders. A woman's body can be central to the construction of the border in the horror film. Her ability for pollution is represented by the concepts of the excremental and the menstrual, both types of waste. Waste is especially abject in the sense that it comes from me but is not part of me, especially for women whose bodies must always be pure and clean. Women's capacity for pollution in the horror genre shows how she could assert her power and threaten others' identities. As the child learns about its body from the maternal authority, it learns to draw borders between the clean and unclean, proper and improper. Transgressions of these are how the monstrous feminine is represented. Now we'll get to my examples. Karen Kusama's Jennifer's Body and Junji Ito's Tomie. Jennifer's Body is a 2009 comedy horror film starring Redacted about a high school student who is sacrificed to Satan by an indie band so that they can become super famous and stuff. However, because she wasn't a virgin, Jennifer does not die during the sacrifice, instead turned into a demon who eats men who are attracted to her. Tomie is a series of horror manga by Junji Ito. The short chapters each depict stories about a beautiful young girl named Tomie, who is so beautiful that men become obsessed with her. So obsessed that they are always driven to kill her. After being murdered, Tomie always regenerates, with each dismembered piece growing into a new Tomie. The chapters I will be focusing on in this video are two parts called Morita Hospital and Basement, where a girl gets a kidney transplant from murdered Tomie, which then begins to grow into a new Tomie inside her. After the regenerating kidney is removed, however, the parts of Tomie DNA subsume the girl's own, turning her into a new Tomie. So when something abject presents itself as clean, it is even more horrifying, because it points to something unclean hiding within. This is scary because not being able to recognize a threat immediately means it could be anywhere. Female monsters often present as beautiful and seductive, luring like a siren, but they often change appearance once their monstrosity is revealed. For example, like how Jennifer's teeth grow and her jaw unhinges when she attacks and consumes. As opposed to the regular feminine, the monstrous feminine is an active subject, castrating rather than castrated. Jennifer attacking men who find her attractive shows this, taking advantage of men as they take advantage of her. The excremental and menstrual aspects of the abject come into play here. The excremental is the threat from the outside, the beautiful monstrous woman, and the menstrual is the threat from the inside, the demon possessing Jennifer, Tomie, inside the girl. Tomie is horrifying because of the loss of identity to something residing within your own body, unable to be seen until too late. Tomie had grown an entire head before she was discovered in an X-ray. Jennifer faces her own threat from the inside, but becomes an external threat to others. After not having fed for a while, Jennifer's monstrosity begins to show, as her usually glowing skin becomes pallid and her under eyes dark. Skin can be a powerful indication of the internal, because it is itself a border containing the whole. Jennifer's change of appearance is abject, a collapsing of the border between the monstrous within and the beauty without, represented by the change in the skin. Here, femininity curdles and becomes abject through its embodiment, with horror's body genre returning twofold with the confrontation with a woman's bodily functions. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. I hope you learnt something and I hope you enjoyed. and leave a comment if you want. I'm very grateful for the comments that I've gotten before, and I want to know what you think. So thank you very much.